want to say a few words about the law lords, which were abolished in England but which used to be the highest court of appeal in our land, and in general say some things about our constitution. I think this is very relevant since we in England, or the United Kingdom, are experiencing the rapid growth of totalitarian legislation and racist legislation against the indigenous people, what people refer to as two-tier justice or two-tier policing. It's a very typical English nuanced word for what is really going on. The first thing I want to say is there is a concept of the separation of powers in political theory. Do not mistake the evolved duties in our constitution, the delegated aspects, for the separation of powers. If I could have an analogy, your liver and your heart have different absolute duties, but they're not separate. They're continuous parts of one individual body. And the proof of this is they're not in opposition, because the separation of powers produces the opposition of these powers. That is how powers, forces, work in the concept. It is precisely based on a concept that constitutional institutions should oppose each other, checking each other. But a body cannot fight against itself, whether a human one or a national one. Your liver and heart do not fight against each other. They are not checks on each other, even though they have completely different spheres of what we might say power or duties. They are aspects of one whole doing these unique things, these unique duties. And this is how the English Constitution, and any good constitution for that matter, works. Lose the notion of the separation of powers. It is a false one. It is a dead end in political theory. Now, to say there is no separation of powers in the English political system is to point out that everything in our system is ultimately the monarchy's. And you already know this. It is the king's government, It is the military pledges itself to the monarch, police and so on. The monarchy represents what I call the transcendent nation. And this is the distinct constitution of the nation state. It's not just the contemporary people, what I'll call the demos, us, for example, voting now. In the English system, there is only one final body, the Houses of Parliament, in one building, the Palace of Westminster. And there is only one final authority, and that is the monarchy's government. And the monarchy's government unites that distinct state, if you like, the transcendent nation, or the nation state, the constitution, and the demos, us voting right now, the contemporary people. Because the government is elected by the demos, but it serves as a royal, aka constitutional government. This is what made the Blair government and every government since then treasonous. They are not constitutional governments, and moreover, they lied to the demos, the very demos that voted for them, let alone those that voted against. As it happened, but that is why you need a strong monarchy and strong hereditary lords. We'll come over to this more later. You need a strong constitutional distinct state, nation state, in case you get a government that is purely demagogic and lies to the demos to get elected. Blair should have been stopped by the Lords and monarchy. Unfortunately, he wasn't, largely due to, I'm afraid, ourselves, because we, the people, imbibed the self-indulgent ideas that ultimately derived from German individualism, although that's another topic, which meant that the constitutional aspects of our country didn't feel confident because we saw them almost as bad things, if not bad things, tyrannical. It's that Republican instinct that nothing should be above us. I'd also like to point out that if you look at the American political system, the only way a good president can get anything done for his people that is not in alignment with the American establishment is by selecting Supreme Court judges that want what he wants, and then issuing a series of executive orders or royal decrees. In short, you have to cheat the system. It's the only way. And we're very fortunate that we have Donald Trump, who has demonstrated that to us in his second term. Look at day one, or whatever, hour one perhaps, a mountain of his executive orders on his desk. Now, the law lords. For those of you who don't know, the law lords used to be the highest judges and therefore formed the highest court in the land. It was a court of appeal. In other words, if justice was not done at lower courts, you would be brought to the law lords to have a final decision. The law lords were protectors of the Constitution by being this final court of appeal. Sovereignty is only in Parliament because of the nature of the distinct monarchy, the nation state, the nation transcendent, and the demos, the national community, the nation contemporary, needing to come together, and that forms the complete national whole in one place, which allows for the making of sovereign law. Similarly, a jury is exactly this. A criminal jury can only be made, or a criminal judgment, can only be made when the monarch's representative, the judge, and the demos representative, the jury, come together. Think of MPs as enacting the demos will, and the monarchy and lords enacting the constitutional or the transcendent demos will, the people that came before us. And when the demos enacts its will, it is added to the constitutional framework, that unwritten, evolving, developing constitution, and thus it becomes the jurisdiction of the monarchy to enforce it. As I said earlier, that's why we have a royal military, we have a police, we have courts, which are ultimately pledged to monarchy, not to government. Even the government itself, of course, is His Majesty's government. Example, the nation states, the constitution's government. And naturally, any anti-constitutional act should not be passed, only acts in line with the constitution. This has been lacking in the last century. And we run on this basis, not as a mere tradition, this is not stasis, that's why we don't have a written constitution, but because we already have a long history of evolutionary development that works. It stems back to the medieval period, where people would consistently harken back to Anglo-Saxon laws. Norman kings repeatedly said, I will uphold Edward the Confessor's laws, whether they did or did not, they said they would. So there's this idea that we're going to keep the culture and the polity of our people, and this itself harkens back to ancient days for the ancient Germanic tribes before they became English in England. It just so happens that our heritage, our polity, our political heritage and our legal heritage is one that works and works very, very well. And we had ancestors wise enough to retain it and develop it via real world experience. Now, law is typically enforced in a delegated fashion by courts, but the law lords allowed all laws to be reined back into that one sovereign place of law, Parliament, to be reviewed to ensure that law is being done properly. Statute law can only be made in Parliament and can be finally tested there. That was the law lords, these judges. And because they're in Parliament, they're accountable, they're scrutinised. They're under view of the other lords and the monarchy, and to a lesser extent, of course, the demos, the MPs, the commons. There's a conversation always, of course, between commons and lords, because that is the conversation between that distinct demos and that distinct constitution, that distinct nation state. You see why I'm telling you about this distinct idea? It's literally built into the architecture of our institutions. This is critical for the English constitution. It retains the ancient concept of, and the law lords, the concept of them, it retains the ancient concept of the court as being something of politics, something derived from the king, which originally the first judges derived from the king were. They're something of politics, and they are not subservient to law itself. Politics is above law, is what I'm saying. For in a sense, a parliament is a jury of highest regard, because a parliament is a representative body of the people, like a jury is. And as I say, in the law lords therefore are overseen by the lords. They can be overseen by the monarchy. The monarchy can sit. And it is, of course, the monarchy's ultimate job, defence of the realm, but guarantor of justice. And law lords are accountable via constitutional oversight in Parliament. It's not a coincidence that the decline of monarchy in constitutional life has directly correlated with the decline in justice. Why do you think this is? Because when you only have the contemporary nation, when you let go of that constitution, that transcendent nation, the nation state as distinct, and just think today of how we have absolutely zero national interest, that's because we got rid of the concept of the nation state, or at least the people ruling us have, which is why they were very happy not simply to give away the Chagos Islands, but to pay people to take them from us. Well, when you only have this contemporary nation, you only have people today with their own interests. And that's not a good way to do justice, because people tend to act for themselves. That, in effect, was the form of feudalism. I'll come to that again shortly. In practice, what we have today, of course, are the globalist politicians arresting people for social media posts, whilst they themselves let themselves off for posts which directly order murder. If the country fails, now let me explain something important about hereditary lords, because I know there will be people who think this is very bad. How can it be right to have hereditary lords? Hereditary lords are landed lords, right? That's why they're hereditary. They have a piece of land that qualifies them for a place in the lords. If England fails, landed lords also fail. But if the country fails, the appointed lords, the kind of lords we have now, which are just selected by politicians, they succeed. Why? Landed, aka the hereditary lords, derive all of their power and position directly from the land of the nation itself. Same for the monarchy. But the appointed lords that have replaced the hereditary ones, they derive their power and position where from? The globalist politicians. And the globalist politics, its power and its position, is entirely based upon concepts of the destruction of the country. For example, a globalist lord can sell a piece of our country out and they succeed because they get a profit and they keep their job anyway. If a hereditary lord were to sell their land, well, they would no longer be the lord. Or if they allowed their land to be ravaged, if they allowed it to turn into a place which is ridden with crime, infested with various evil foreign ideologies, well, they no longer make money and they no longer have a nice place to live. Globalists, appointed lords, don't care about that. Think of Keir Starmer himself. He doesn't care about England burning because, as he himself says, he doesn't like Westminster, he likes Davos. He doesn't like being in England, he likes being in any of the various cosmopolitan ivory towers around the world, and they have the money to move there. My point is, hereditary lords, believe it or not, are the genuinely accountable and appointable ones, and it makes sense when you're dealing with the transcendent nation state and constitution that you have lords who are directly bound and tied to it, rather than any contemporaneous demos. Otherwise, they're simply puppets, and the whole concept falls apart. Which it has. Hence, law lords exist for one reason, and only one reason really, the same reason that the first royal judges were made, to protect the constitution, to protect justice, which they do by being a final court of appeal per the constitution. We today now have a Supreme Court invented by the Blairites. The new Supreme Court is a distinct, separate body. It's based upon that separation of powers, the concept we now know is totally and utterly flawed. And it has its own agenda, it has its own character. It's based, incidentally, on anti-English legal and political principles. And it works in opposition to Parliament, and therefore to Crown and to nation, the nation state and the Constitution. The Supreme Court exists solely to protect itself and the principles that underride it, to further itself as a distinct, separate institution. And none of those have anything to do with our country. It makes laws, such as the prorogation of Parliament, perhaps the most effective demonstration of how these people have taken over the country, since the Supreme Court now tells Parliament what to do, which means, as I said, telling Crown and people what to do. And before, of course, only the Crown in Parliament could do and enforce laws, could make and enforce laws, which before only the parliamentary law lords could then oversee. Of course, the Supreme Court, it does this, though, not just in opposition to Parliament, but over it. The Supreme Court was made by Blair to be above Parliament. It is the most pure example of a quango, something made to destroy sovereignty, to destroy England, and therefore enact a conquest of the country. We're now witnessing that conquest happened 2 decades on. Where the law lords are derived directly from the monarchy, the nation-state, originally in medieval times, as I said, from the king's own justices, which incidentally was important because it saw off the threat, a very real threat, of a feudal, i.e. a private oligarchical legal system coming into effect. Law lords are constitutional, Supreme Court is treason. The revolutionary left of Blair destroyed the nation-state, the constitution, and turned the country into solely a contemporary demos. Please don't think of this as the untrammelled rule of the people, as something to be celebrated, as Republicans always declare, as if that would be a good thing. Anyway, I don't know of anybody whose power should be untrammelled in this way. Because once you lose the distinct nation-state, that transcendent nation, the English constitution, all that is left is the feudal state, the rule of the powerful contemporary people. This was actually the great conflict, as I said, of the early to medieval England, between the sovereignty and justice derived from the monarchy, or nation-state, and that derived from the powerful private individuals, the feudal system. We were very lucky in England, our monarchy won out. When the demos aspires to be the state, as what happens when you become a republic and your figurehead is not the monarchy, but some elected president, well, now the people are the state, which would make the state a mere mob. That would probably be the best case scenario. Unfortunately, what happens always in practice is that it means that the powerful and rich of the demos, of the contemporary people, become the state. And congratulations, you've now created an oligarchy. You've created a dictatorship. You've created some form of corrupt tyranny. Tyranny is when a mere contemporary person becomes the state themselves, rather than the state being a distinct constitutional transcendent element from them. Or rather say, something that we the people all belong to, but are not ourselves it. That's what really makes a true nation state. That is what made Nelson tell his sailors that England expects. It's that transcendent nation state to which we all belong. Contrast that with Nazi Germany, where Adolf Hitler is the state. This is the dream, of course, of Blair and Starmer. You must keep the monarchy as an institution of a distinct nation state which the demos continues to be a part of. That is what makes the nation state as a form of polity and a constitution unique and superior, because it is a transcendent endeavour. It is a foundation and crucible for a real civilization that can retain the good, pass on wisdom, and develop surely, and not succumb to ignorance or radicalisation or self-indulgence. The English evolutionary way of politics needs a monarchy and distinct constitutional nation state. By having a monarchy, we protect that. It means that we don't have some elected stooge, some prime lord, as we might call them today, first among equals. It would just be another idiot. And originated from first principles. This is where our constitution comes, first principles of the ancient Germanic or Nordic polity. And here's the real crack. It worked. And working is all that matters when it comes to politics, when it comes to a polity, because we have to live in it and we have to live with it. Very evidently, the ideas, the principles of the revolutionary socialists and liberals, which have run our country entirely since 1997, and certainly, I would argue, largely untrammelled since the end of World War II, have completely ruined us. They have completely ruined a country which stretches back 1,200 years, whose constitution stretches back, in a very direct sense, 800 years, and which survived all that time. I suggest we enact a restoration of it very quickly, but we can only do that if we understand what we are restoring and why. Thank you very much.